Hello everybody, good morning. As David says, I'm just going to give a brief overview of where we are in terms of the LGPS and Shropshire Pension Fund specifically. So just to look back over the last 12 months and where we are. So first issue is in relation to the CARE, the Career Average Revalued Earnings, and obviously that came into play from 1st of April 14. So we've had now the first year of that ran through to 31st of March 15. So the first benefit statements have been sent out on the back of that. Now across the country there has been significant difficulties in relation to getting all that information together to allow those benefit statements to be sent out by the deadline of 31st of August. Here in Shropshire, we did manage to receive all the data back from all the employers by the date that was required. So from that point of view, it's been very successful. There are, as Teddy alluded to, there have been some issues and some best practice, some improvement that can be made to the overall process. So that's going to be picked up and followed up over the next few weeks and months. One of the other big things that's come into play from this financial year, from the 1st of April 15, has been the introduction of the pension board. So this has been trailed now for quite a while. It actually came into being from April. Now, that diagram, which is a little bit out of focus, and it's just my eyes, is all of the changes that have been made as a result of the Lord Houghton review that was undertaken back in March 2011. Now, there were 27 recommendations that came out of that, and all of that governance that is now around the LGPS has been put in place. So on the left-hand side, we have the scheme advisory board. Now, that was set up as a shadow advisory board, but from the 1st of April this year, it's actually been set up as a statutory body. Now, what that does is that collects the information from all of the 89 pension funds around the country, and puts it all together into an annual report. The last annual report was produced around about the end of April this year. So it gets all the information in terms of numbers of employees, numbers of members, funding levels, numbers of places across the country, and tries to provide a national picture rather than the sort of disjointed information that was there previously in relation to each fund running its own particular affairs. So that information now is available. It provides advice through to in our case, Shropshire County Pension Fund, but also provides advice through to DCLG, which is the next box along. And DCLG, Department of Communities and Government, provides regulations and guidance through. So all of that national information then is provided through into some form of guidance to go forward. Local Government Association, so this provides information and protects the requirements of the employers. So the LGA feeds into the process on behalf of the employers within it. Pensions regulator has been in place for a while now, and obviously provides all regulation for pensions and links in to the Department of Work and Pensions. So that's the national picture, and then over on the right-hand side you've got the Pensions Committee and this new Pensions Board. So the Pensions Committee has been in place for a while. This provides the overall governance and decision-making for everything in relation to Shropshire County pension fund. So when it comes to the valuations that are undertaken, when it comes to appointing the value, appointing the fund managers that we have, any advisors, all of those decisions are made within the Pensions Committee. So the new item that's been added in relation to the Pensions Board that came into play from the 1st of April this year, that provides another layer of governance then around the whole of the pension fund. So this is looking at the advice that's coming from those of the boards that I've mentioned, and looking at the decisions that are made by the Pensions Committee, and ensuring that all of those things are done appropriately and correctly. Now, Pensions Board is made up of 4 members, so the 2 employer reps, so all of the employers are written to and asked for representatives to come forward and put themselves onto the board, and 2 member reps as well. We have a lot more member reps come forward than employee reps, to be fair, but we went through an employment process myself, and Claire Porter as the monitoring officer of the Shropshire Council. We will appoint an appointment board, and we appointed 4 people onto that. So the two employer reps are Liz Fury from Harper Adams and Stuart Wheeler from Sevenside Housing, and the 2 member reps, Pat Hockley and Mike Morris, who used to be employees at Shropshire Council. So first meeting of the pension board was held in July. They're 2 years, the next one will be in February, and the work is starting to kick off now in relation to what that board is going to do, what that board is going to do. So continue with the review of the last 12 months. In terms of the funding levels for the Shropshire scheme, we're now up to a value of just over £1.5 billion. In the last 12 months, returns of 173 million came through. So this is a 13.7% return on the year, which is a big percentage, particularly considering the current 13.7%. That was exceeded its benchmark by 1.4% over the year. Now, what the graph is showing is the yellow bars. These are all the fund managers that we have our 1.5 billion invested in. The yellow bars are showing their actual return, and the blue bars are their individual benchmarks. And the first thing that we can see, which is actually quite unusual, is that every single one of our managers made a positive return. Now, that's unusual because what we're trying to do is diversify the overall portfolio. So you would expect that if there is some bad news in any particular sector, whether it be equities or property or infrastructure or bonds, that's evened out by improvements in other areas, or the reduction is less bad. What you don't expect is for everything to go in one direction. We quite like everything to go in a positive direction, but the way that the fund is set up is that we'll be making sure that not everything goes in a negative direction. You can see the top bar, the whole fund returns. That's the benchmark, and the returns exceeding it by 1.4%. The next one, GIP, which is infrastructure, you can see considerably outperformed its benchmark. That's really good, but unfortunately we've only got about 20 million that's actually invested in that particular area. That's infrastructure. Other areas, the hedge funds perform particularly well. It's about 160 million invested in there. Global equities, being a general third one, that's passive equities, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a moment. There's about 300 million invested in there, so it's not weighted, but it does give you an overall view of where the fund made its returns last year. So that's all good news. Moving on, in terms of that investment strategy, one of the things that we need to do continually is, despite good returns and despite a portfolio that seems to be diversifying, we always need to continually review that and consider whether the portfolio is actually set up for what we think is going to happen in the next few years. So we reviewed the investment strategy this year, and we decided that we would make some changes to that strategy. That's gone through committee, and that's been approved, and we're now in the process of putting those things in place. So what do we actually do in terms of the investment strategy? Well, at the moment, prior to the adjustments, we were holding about 25% of the fund in index-linked gilts and bonds. So those bonds were split between constrained bonds and corporate bonds. Corporate bonds have not been making great returns, and looking into the future, were considered to be perhaps an area that we want to move away from. Constrained bonds, however, gives more freedom to the managers to seek out better investments, but also doesn't change the risk profile. Index-linked gilts are linked very much to the way that our liabilities are valued. So while we can add £173 million into the overall fund on the asset side, so you improved your assets by 13.4%. If your liabilities over the same period have gone up by 15%, the actual funding position is worse. By investing in gilts, your assets more closely match your liabilities. So if you see an increase or reduction, it more closely matches that. At the moment, previously we had 10% invested in those index-linked gilts. What we decided to do was we took that whole 25% and we took 7.5% out of corporate bonds, took 10% out of index-linked gilts, and we brought into play 2 new unconstrained bond managers and split some funding between those, so they got 7% each. And then the remaining 3.5% that we've got left, we put into an LDI, which is a liability-driven investment. Now, LDIs are very complicated, but the advantage of an LDI is, again, it's similar to index-linked gilts. It tracks the liabilities of the associated with the fund. So, if your liabilities are rising and falling, then that element of your portfolio hold will be protected. The advantage of an LDI is you only need to put 3.5% in, you can gear it, so it effectively provides protection to the same level, around about 10% of the fund. That's good news. And therefore it allows you to invest some of that funding that was in gilts into those unconstrained bonds, so there's an advantage there. Now, in the fullness of time, what you could do, if the fund was 100% funded, you could in theory put 100% of the funding into an LDI, or something close to that. And then once you're there 100% funded, you then continue to match your liabilities. Obviously we're not 100% funded at the point of time, and therefore we're looking to invest in other areas to try and outstrip those returns so that we actually get closer to 100%. The graph that's on the right is just showing where we are in terms of overall membership. So, as you can see, the green bars in the middle are rising. This is the deferred pensioners now have over 14,000 of those, and the blue and the red bars on the left-hand side, this is showing the actives. So the actives overall are growing, the number is growing overall. You can see the numbers of part-times, the red bar, are generally increasing, and the light blue bars on the left, which is the full-time actives, those are slowly reducing over time. So we're seeing a shift in terms of the demographic, but overall the numbers are increasing. So what we're doing over the next 6 to 12 months, as I've said, we're investing, we're implementing the changes in relation to those investment reviews. So there's 3 managers that we're taking on, 2 unconstrained bond managers and an LDI manager. We're now in the process of transferring the assets, getting those things in place, and there will be further work that we then do on the back of that, reviewing that, considering what the implications of that are. The other big change that's come about, which we're now working through the detail of, was in relation to budget announcements. So, general election back in May, budget announcements in the early summer, and this follows on from announcements that have been made previously around reform in relation to LGPS. Now, what the government is expecting is that we move in some way to a more collaborative approach in relation to the way that we manage pension funds. So the 89 funds across the country. Originally, the government talked about should we be reducing those number of funds down, should we be going down to half a dozen funds that are run on a different basis or run on different mechanisms. The evidence didn't suggest that was an obvious conclusion to reach, and more work was required. So bigger is not always better, but we do need to consider those key issues in relation to pensions, which is there's a deficit that's increasing costs. We need to keep employer contributions as low as possible. We need to keep it affordable into the future. So they're going to try and find ways of managing this. Various consultations have come out, various requests for information. What hasn't been a lot of is guidance, specific guidance to say this is what we're expecting you to do with funds. But what has come out is an expectation that while the government is working through what it is actually going to legislate or what it's actually going to do, that shouldn't stop local government pension funds from talking to each other, looking at ways in which we can collaborate with other funds locally, set up new vehicles or whatever. So down in London, they're setting up common investment vehicles, looking at the London pension funds down there. We have been working with some of our close colleagues in geographically with Cheshire, originally Cheshire and Staffordshire, and we looked to see whether there was anything we could do to help collaborate, to work together to look at the investments that we have. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've got around about 300 million, which is invested in general in passive equities. this is just 300 million that gets passed over to the General, and they buy products which they basically invest in stocks and shares which match basic indices like FTSE 100 or whatever. So in terms of the product itself, it's quite a simple product. It delivers us good returns. It's based on whatever the stock market is doing. Obviously, assuming the stock market is performing well. And really, all you're doing is you're buying a product that how quickly it tracks that market, which selections it actually takes up. Fundamentally, it's quite a simple product. And all pension funds pretty much have one of these products within their portfolio. So we considered that this was an area where it would be a good start to go and speak to other authorities to say, what do you have in terms of your passive equities, who you investing with, what sort of rates are you paying, what sort of indices are you following, what sort of returns are you getting. When we originally spoke with Staffordshire and Cheshire, we did some work then, and we've all got 3 different passive managers. We pulled them all together, had discussions. What we found out were the fees that we were paying Shropshire were actually lower than the others, and the other 2 organisations managed to reduce their fees on the back of the fact that they could see that we were getting a better deal. On the back of that, we've then taken it a step further. So now we're working on 7 other authorities, again around the sort of Midlands area, and looking to see whether we can actually pool all of our passive investments. So that our 300 million would be linked up with other 300, 400, 500 millions from the other authorities, and starts to get into the low billions then. And then you speak to a single manager and you say, would you like to take over a portfolio of perhaps 4, 5, 6 billion pounds? All of the decision making, all of the solitary in relation to that remains with Shropshire. What you're doing is you're buying into a pooled fund and you get that advantage in relation to economies of scale. So this is a first step, and it's about demonstrating that we are able to do some work to improve the current situation. Now we're hopeful that work will lead to a further reduction in our fees, so that's all good. I mean, it might only save us thousands, it certainly won't save us millions, but you'll actually have similar levels of return, same levels of risk, but lower fees. So that's a good start. Whether you can extend that out into other more complicated areas, as say, mentioned earlier, we've taken on an LDI manager. Very few funds have got LDI managers in place. So there will always be a case of certain individual decisions being taken based on specific portfolios, where there is that opportunity, we should be working together with organisations to do that. So where that's going to end, nationally, the government are talking about, well, we need some sort of pooling vehicles that are of the size of around about 30 billion. If you look at going back to the Scheme Advisory Board, if you look at that national picture, the amount of investments across the whole of the country amount to somewhere around 200 billion pounds. So if you're talking about 30 billion pound pooled schemes, you're talking about 5, 6, 7 schemes across the country that everybody would buy into. How would you break those down? What would they look like? Would they be based geographically? Would they be based on the types of instruments that you're picking up? All of that detail might work going through. We're hoping that there'll be a more formal announcement in the spring of next year, and that will help them to define where we go. But fundamentally, we are still working on the same premise at the moment. Last couple of points, actual variation, actuarial valuation, I should say. The last valuation was in 2013, every 3 years, so our next one is coming up at the end of March, start of next calendar year. That will therefore, that will be work over the summer and will lead to then the implications in relation to the employee rate set for the next 3 years on the 1st of April 2017, so that's when that will come into play. And then just to mention that we have the annual meeting on the 12th of November coming up, so I believe we're holding that in here in Charlotte. I'm just having the one meeting this year, and that will be filmed, so you have the opportunity to come along or watch it all again on YouTube to future day. So that's all I'm going to run through. So I'll leave it at that unless anybody has any specific questions.